This is the story of an expedition that set off to try to travel around the world by car. I've already used my camera to record the roads of Europe and Asia, and a few weeks ago, we took our first steps on American soil. We want to travel the continent from north to south, from Alaska to Ushuaia, the southernmost city on the planet. But the road is long, and it's best to go slow. For now, we'll focus on the west coast of the United States and the north of Mexico. We're about to embark on one of the most varied legs of our entire journey. We'll visit some truly genuine North American cities by day and by night. We'll take a peek over the cliffs of Copper Canyon and get lost in Mexico's Federal District. We're going to trade the glaciers of Alaska in for the warmth of Mexican folk singing. But we'll also meet the first people to have inhabited this part of the world. This will lead us to the Navajo reservations, and later to the Tarahumara people. We'll move on without looking back, and, if possible, without looking down. Chapter 4: The Many Faces of North America. We've been driving through snowy landscapes for days. We've set foot on Canadian land and will now head further south. We then had to leave the car and take a ferry in order to return to Alaska, and from here we will start our tour of the most rugged fjords on the American continent. Juneau is inaccessible by land and set between the mountains and the sea. It looks like a summer resort, but in 1906, someone decided to make this city the capital of the largest state in the nation. It takes all of 15 minutes to walk across downtown Juneau from end to end. On that walk, we discovered the first totem poles so far on our journey. Traditionally, the Tlingit people used to carve these wooden poles in honor of their ancestors. If it's true that human migration entered America across the Bering Strait, the Tlingit could have descended from the first Eskimos who traveled south. For the time being, we are going to make a stop some 12 miles northeast of Juneau, at a place the Tlingit used to call Aquataxit, although today it is better known as the Mendenhall Glacier. In order to reach the base of the glacier, we'll have to walk more than a mile over a frozen lake.
Una espesa capa de hielo bajo nuestros pies.
The glacier's tongue spans out some 12 miles, and walking along the base of this huge mass of ice is somehow hypnotic and captivating. The bluish color is due to the pressure from the bottom layers of the glacier. And sometimes that pressure makes the ice mass creak.
Sería mala suerte, 3000 años de hielo perpetuo y se cae hoy.
The spring thaw arrives earlier each year, and within a few weeks the lake will start to melt. We've spent almost 2 months in Alaska, enduring the ravages of winter, but all three of us realized that we'll miss the landscapes of one of the most beautiful regions in the United States. We'll have to make the best of our time. Tomorrow, we'll get on another boat that will cross the fields of the Alaskan coast and the Canadian seaboard. The Columbia is a ferry built in the 1960s, and it'll take us back to the mainland a little over 300 miles south. For several days, we'll have to get used to the wake the boat leaves behind among the crags. We'll brave the cold wind on deck to contemplate the labyrinth of islands and canals, and get a peek at the desolate lighthouses dotting this sparsely populated region. Up on the bridge, members of the crew are constantly taking turns. The task of dodging islets of ice requires full use of all 5 senses 24 hours a day. We'll spend 5 days aboard the Columbia, so we'd better find a way to pass the time. Each of us keeps busy practicing his favorite hobby. As we continue to navigate south, the mountains in the background are no longer snow-capped. The cold begins to abate, and we gradually move away from the longest winter any of us has ever experienced. We're about to trade in the fields for the highways along the west coast of the United States. At the port in Bellingham, we finally begin to feel that spring has arrived. The first stop takes us to Seattle, and the moment I take out my camera, I realize that people here have few inhibitions. Unlike what we experienced in Alaska, people here live outside on the streets. The city has a pace that's contagious. Seattle was home to musicians such as Jimi Hendrix and the band Pearl Jam. Many now try to follow in their footsteps, with varying success.
Put on display to justify your war.
It's hard to attract anyone's attention in a place where whatever you do tends to become a spectacle. Our car has arrived from Beijing at the port in Seattle, but it won't be tuned up and ready to go for a few days. Dan and I will continue on our way in a second-hand car, and Jose Luis will catch up with us later in our own vehicle, the one that has a Spanish license plate on it. In any case, the time has come for us to start driving, and driving, and driving. We leave behind Portland's bright lights, and the following morning we're still on the highway. Some 400 miles after leaving Seattle, we're finally greeted by a road sign we had really been looking forward to seeing. We'll be driving past endless miles of pine forest, but soon the landscape begins to change. These are the redwood forests with their groves of sequoias, and here it's easy to understand that we're surrounded by the tallest living beings on the planet. When we're not driving through the redwood forests, we're driving along the coast. Wherever you look, this place looks promising. We've just about traveled down the whole coastline from one end to the other. But now we're going to trade in these natural landscapes for one of cinema's most famous urban landscapes.
El Golden Gate es el puente más importante de San Francisco. Sus 1.600 metros dan acceso a esta ciudad que posee un carácter único. Aquí nacieron corrientes alternativas como la generación Beat, el orgullo gay y el movimiento hippie.
San Francisco has become world famous for so many reasons that, as we walk down its streets, we really feel as though we've been here before. Who hasn't seen 1,000 films featuring the Golden Gate? Who hasn't ever heard of Alcatraz? Who has never seen images of the city's steep streets and cable cars? Yes, San Francisco is pretty much one enormous déjà vu. But the city's true personality lies in the diversity of its neighborhoods. And all of these neighborhoods combined make up one of the most fascinating metropolises in America. Right near the financial district, Chinatown gives us a sudden jolt. It really feels as though we have been teleported to the Far East. This is where you'll find the largest Chinese population outside of the People's Republic of China. In this city, tolerance has become a mark of identity. The Castro district staged the first public protest in the so-called Gay Pride movement. During the Second World War, thousands of American servicemen were sent to San Francisco after being discharged for being homosexual. And they wound up creating one of the most influential gay communities in the world. Near the Castro area, we enter another neighborhood that also sports rainbow colors on its facades, although for different reasons. In the 60s, the intersection between Haight and Ashbury witnessed the birth of the hippie movement. Although, to be honest, today the hippie world has been reduced to a bunch of peace signs, the odd fad that simply refuses to go away, and a handful of nostalgic locals. The so-called painted ladies have retained their glamour of old. They're Victorian buildings that managed to survive the 1906 earthquake. The great thing about San Francisco is its ability to reinvent itself. Each neighborhood leaves its mark, its own personality. Outsiders feel welcome here because in this city, there really is room for everyone. We have to continue on our way, and this time we're headed towards inland California. At this stage of the journey, we no longer expected to find any more winter landscapes, but the road proves we were mistaken. The snow begins to reappear as we start driving up the slopes that lead to Sierra Nevada. What can I say? California never ceases to amaze us. We are approaching a place where the mountains appear before us without the least restraint.
Durante 40 kilómetros la naturaleza sencillamente se vuelve loca en el corazón de California. Es el recorrido que atraviesa el Parque Nacional de Yosemite, uno de los valles más populares y visitados de todo el mundo.
Over 3 million people travel on Yosemite's roads each year. But, even so, it's not hard to find yourself alone here. To lose yourself around a bend in the road with only the mountains and forests for company. If you're lucky, you can also get close to the park's animals. The valley was created due to the erosion caused by an old glacier that covered this entire surface well over 1 million years ago. The ice mass began to decrease as the centuries went by, sculpting the walls of Yosemite as it disappeared. Today, these walls constitute quite a challenge for mountaineers and an amazing view for any visitor. When the spring thaw comes, thousands of cascades begin to roll off the mountainside, forming a delirious swirl of waterfalls. This waterfall has a 2,565-foot drop before it reaches the ground. It's the tallest in North America. As I record these images, I feel as though in any corner of the park, I'm liable to find an exaggerated version of nature. And this sensation will not stay behind in Yosemite. The southern highways lead us to another place where you spend the entire visit looking up. Some of these trees began to sprout before Jesus Christ was born. And unlike the younger Californian redwoods up north, these giant sequoias have much bigger trunks. Walking around just a single tree can actually be considered quite a hike. This is General Grant. It occupies third place in the ranking of the world's largest trees. It contains about 45,900 cubic feet of wood, but beyond data and rankings, Sequoia National Park really conveys a sense of what prehistoric times were like. California boasts of having the world's most visited valley, the most coveted beaches, the tallest trees in any forest, and the most cosmopolitan cities in the continent. And now, we are about to exchange these alpine landscapes for the hottest deserts in the country. California also has deserts. Temperatures rise by 25 degrees in under an hour. As we drive through the highways of the Mojave Desert, we realize that we won't be seeing snow again until we reach southern Argentina. And that won't be for many months. As the heat continues to rise, the traffic dies down. These roads look like they don't really lead anywhere. They give the impression that no one wants to explore Death Valley. The central part of the valley is nearly 300 feet below sea level. So this place is actually an enormous saltwater basin where temperatures have been known to reach up to 136 degrees Fahrenheit. Tonight, we will drive up to the state of Nevada. Right now, we just want to get to a place that's inhabited. And in fact, there is one place where man has invented a new concept in urban landscapes. Let's just say this place is called Las Vegas.
Mientras hablo en este instante, miles de carteles luminosos encienden la ciudad. Cientos de espectáculos tienen lugar en los hoteles y lo que es más importante, millones de dólares cambian de manos. La noche es joven en Las Vegas y lo que no entiendo es por qué sigo hablando yo aquí. Vamos a probar suerte.
What can we say about Las Vegas? Perhaps the most practical approach would be to offer some information. Let's see. Las Vegas is the largest city founded in the 20th century, and it has already become the brightest point on Earth visible from outer space. More than 37 million people come here every year. The city's neon tubes would cover 14,912 miles if placed end to end. 17 of the world's 20 biggest hotels are located in Las Vegas. It would take one man 367 years to spend one night in each hotel room in the city. The Bellagio Hotel cost $1.6 billion to build and includes a 345,000 square foot artificial lake. Las Vegas's 1,700 licensed casinos are open 24 hours a day and contain some 200,000 slot machines.
0,12 dólares.
The average visitor spends $545 on gambling. And almost 40,000 change hands each minute in the casinos. Only 5% of visitors admit to having gambled in Las Vegas. And in case you're wondering what we did here, we'll plead the city's motto: whatever happens in Vegas, stays in Vegas. Jose Luis has finally arrived with our newly tuned up car. He's not just our photographer, he's also our producer. So we'd better not tell him much about what we've been up to. Back at the airport, tourists continue to come and go. We're going back on the road. The car we initially left Spain with is finally going for its first ride around America. Since leaving Seattle, Jose Luis has traveled all alone along the same route we had taken. And now, in the state of Arizona, we're entering a land that belongs to the last remaining natives in the United States. The Navajo are very familiar with this red earth, but erosion created this landscape long before human beings settled here.
Desde Alaska hasta Arizona hemos recorrido el país entero. Creo que nos merecemos un descanso, pero antes de marcharnos nos asomamos a una de las maravillas de la naturaleza, el Gran Cañón del Colorado.
The oldest national park in the United States is really an immense network of canals, although they're not all visible on the surface. Some 20 miles from the city of Page, you'll find one of the best-kept secrets in Colorado. A narrow corridor forces us to walk in single file through the rock walls that the Navajo call Antelope Canyon. Afterwards, we lose ourselves in the recesses of the gorge. We do so silently, fascinated by the soft shapes that time and the elements have managed to forge. Down here, underneath the Arizona desert, we again experience that old sense of unreality. For thousands of years, water has filtered down, sculpting these shapes in the canyon. Today, the light sets off this natural work of art. And we cannot avoid taking a lifelong souvenir with us, the sort of souvenir that doesn't need a frame. But this land full of caves and canyons has also served as a refuge for human beings. Under a huge rock arcade, you can still see the ruins of the city of Betatakin, which today is considered a Navajo national monument. It is located at the base of the Serie Canyon, but its inhabitants abandoned it in the year 1300 following a drought. Today, the Navajo Nation is the largest native population in the United States. There are 200,000 Navajo, most of them on the reservations. Reservations, a concept that's unsettling to say the least, even if it does cover a larger area than Holland and Belgium put together. It seems as though the Navajo have resigned themselves to accept American culture. But they still keep a distance, thanks to the invisible border that surrounds their land. In Tuba City, there's a huge market held each week. And show business has also reached the Navajo population, and no one spares any effort to promote themselves. The market is a social center where people meet to haggle over prices and get their hands on a hat or on the latest range in baby carriers that you strap on your back. Today, only a few of the women still wear the Navajo's traditional dress. As is usually the case among indigenous groups, the men tend to be the first to sport jeans and brand-name t-shirts. But we don't see any tourists. The white man passes the reservations on the main road through the national parks. And he doesn't stop here. Daniel Peches is a witch doctor, or as he prefers to say, a medicine man. He welcomes us into his hogan, a traditional Navajo dwelling that is used as a consulting room.
Why this hogan is special?
This is a hogan that was built by the people here that works here to work with those people that have drug problems or alcohol problems, to have a counseling session in here and other ceremonies that takes place in this hogan.
Alcohol has become a major problem for the Navajo. Nowadays, its sale is banned on the reservations. In cities such as Kayenta, people prefer to seek refuge in their homes, and there's hardly a trace of life on the street. There is almost no activity here. I said almost. Some young people spend the afternoon far away from the malls. They would rather play old war songs, and thanks to them, these songs can still be heard among the Red Mountains in certain neighborhoods in a place called Kayenta. Children on the reservation speak English and listen to their MP3 players, and they chat over the internet with friends from the other side of the planet. But it will be up to them to keep the memory of the Navajo people alive in the future, and to make sure the old songs and drumming will still be heard. But what is there beyond these cities? Where have the nomadic Indians gone? In order to seek an answer, we'll have to delve deep into the heart of one of the most famous natural parks in the world. And this afternoon, we're alone in Monument Valley. Waking up inside a hogan, surrounded by some of the most cinematographic mountains in the world, is an unforgettable experience, to say the least. Indians have always lived here. And even today, several families are settled in the most remote areas of Monument Valley. These are isolated cases. Most people have emigrated to the cities. Rose Issa was born among these mountains and intends to stay here until her dying days. As is true for most things among the Navajo, a distinction is made between feminine and masculine hogans. Women's homes are larger and more welcoming, and this is where Rose Issa greets us. She barely speaks English, so we'll interview her with the help of an interpreter.
there are many Navajos who decide to move. Every time there are more people who are going outside. Like I know that some Navajos have even a casino in Las Vegas. So are you losing your culture?
Rose is a born survivor. There are very few Navajo left on the Navajo's sacred land. But some drums can still be heard. Natives express themselves more eloquently through the music of their ancestors. I wonder whether these Indians are descendants of the Tlingit in Alaska, who in turn descended from the Eskimos that arrived from Mongolia across the Bering Strait. I wonder if there is a link between the totems we saw up north and these rock totems, which are also sacred for the Navajo. Sometimes I get the feeling our journey is taking us to see the last remaining vestiges of indigenous life, at a time when urban life is threatening to do away with all traditions. But I find it hard to believe that, in the future, Monument Valley might be reduced to a postcard. It's hard to believe how life changes on either side of a border. We've just entered Mexico, and for us, this feels like a sort of homecoming. The language, Latin culture, and the architecture are all familiar. But the geography of this part of Mexico has a personality all its own. Within a few days, we'll find lush forests and arid wastelands, vertiginous water gaps, and peaceful lakes. But there's one more thing that makes this place special. After eating nothing but hamburgers and salads for months, we could really go for some Mexican food.
Muy buenas.
Buenas tardes.
Que me han dicho que aquí se come muy bien, ¿no?
Muy rica comida mexicana.
Pues vamos a probar con chamoy.
Un poquito de chile picante.
¿Cuál te gustaría probar?
Es camote, ¿no?
Sí, camote, calabaza.
Agua.
We must admit the food here really is much better. Now we'd like to get a bit closer to the Mexicans. It's obvious the Spanish conquistadors mixed with the natives, but I wonder whether you can still find ancestors of those tribes that entered America through Alaska. Perhaps the Tarahumara people are the descendants of those first Indians.
La ciudad de Krill abre al visitante las puertas de la Sierra de Tarahumara, cuyos indígenas dan a esta parte del estado de Chihuahua un color verdaderamente especial.
Creel is really just a base from which to visit communities in the nearby mountains. There are trains that leave this station and go all the way across Mexico's Sierra Madre. But we prefer to drive along its roads. And here we are definitely in Tarahumara territory. Next to Lake Arareco, some women have changed their customs and now work making crafts for the handful of travelers who come this way. Meanwhile, other families still live like they lived thousands of years ago. Sheltered inside a cave. Nevertheless, there are also brighter communities where the Tarahumara have found a balance between their own traditions and the Catholic faith. These natives have become guardians of their local church, which was built almost 3 centuries ago. Next to the church, between walls made of adobe, rock and wood, we discover paintings from Spain's Golden Age. With all due respect to the locals, this museum seems disproportionately large for a tiny village hidden in the mountains. Although that is precisely its charm. Before enjoying this treasure, you have to reach Kusarare. When we approach the school, we see that Tarahumara culture is in good hands.
El 4, el 15 y las luchas tarahumaras, eso lo vamos a trabajar como tarea para mañana. ¿Lo pueden traer sobre este trabajo que hicieron?
The children study their people's history here. They dress in their community's vivid colors and learn their own language. Tarahumara is a word that describes those who are light-footed. So there's no doubt many of these kids are 100% Tarahumara. For those who live in Mexico's Sierra Madre, it's good to have cold blood as well as light feet. Near Kusarare, we sense the vertigo of some of Mexico's most rugged landscapes. The valleys of Copper Canyon are even deeper and much wider than the Colorado's canyons. Today, near the canyons, you can buy handcrafted items or try to haggle over prices with the natives. But long before the first wave of tourists arrived, this place was home to the Tarahumara. According to tradition, visitors must test their courage before leaving. The challenge consists of making it all the way to what they call the Flying Rock. A boulder teetering on the brink of a 2,000-foot high cliff. There is nothing around it, just the drop. Not to brag, but don't I look much more relaxed? Now we continue to drive through the mountain roads, crossing all sorts of landscapes on our journey south. Almost without realizing it, we've left Arizona and its nature parks behind, and soon afterwards, we also left Chihuahua. But here in the state of Durango, we're about to forget all this vertigo. It's time for us to enjoy Mexican culture. We feel like relaxing a bit and sharing some of the local products from the land where Pancho Villa was born. That brings us to one of the many wineries scattered all over the state of Durango. Mezcal is a distilled beverage obtained from a plant called maguey. It was already produced by the Maya, and these wineries still prepare it using traditional methods. This is where fermentation takes place. Afterwards, the drink is distilled. Mezcal can contain up to 60% alcohol, and if you work at a winery, trust me, it's not a good idea to drink the fruits of your labor.
¿Cómo está? ¿Lleno? Ahí está bien. Yo creo que es suficiente, ¿no?
Sí. Ya por Dios, pues ya ni modo, ¿verdad?
Está rico. ¡Órale!
This clearly is not going to end very well.
¿Lo lleno? ¿Qué pasa con esa canción que reza tal que así que empieza como... Con dinero y sin dinero.
Ah, I saw that coming.
Que quiero y mi palabra la haré.
300 hungover miles later, we are finally about to reach an extraordinary city. Of all the beautiful places in Mexico, we have decided to stop in Guanajuato, the main cultural hub in the country's northern region. Guanajuato is peculiar for many reasons. First of all, there's a network of tunnels that crisscrosses the entire city, and they were built over a century ago. Above this labyrinth of tunnels, there is another labyrinth made up of painted houses, squares, and back streets. As we explore the city, one of the first places we discover is the flower market. The streets are filled with people, shops, and things you have to burst open on your head.
¿Pero hay que rompérselo uno mismo o se lo puedes tirar a alguien?
A la gente que le guste, a sus amistades.
Esta es la tradición. ¡Alegría!
You can tell this is a university town. It's got that magical and lively feel with young people flooding the streets and filling the theatres. After taking my camera for a stroll around Guanajuato, I can assure you this city is full of life. But I could not imagine it also hides some gruesome stories about death.
También hay lugar para el misterio en Guanajuato. El visitante puede contemplar los 111 cuerpos momificados que han sido hallados en uno de los panteones de la ciudad. Lo más inquietante es que estos cuerpos nunca fueron embalsamados.
The Santa Paula Cemetery has become a place where the dead don't ever really die. It's best to take a couple of deep breaths before entering the Mummy Museum, which has the world's specialists in forensic medicine baffled. They simply cannot find an explanation for these mummifications. Some of the scenes are especially chilling, like these men who were apparently buried while they were still alive. There are also children here. There's even a mummified fetus. This is too much. Let's get some fresh air. Now we're headed to a place that has a little bit of everything, because there's room for everything in a city with 20 million inhabitants. The Federal District is a meeting place, and it's also a place where Mexico's present and past coexist side by side.
Los 54 metros cuadrados de la bandera mexicana nos indican que estamos en la capital del país, concretamente en la Plaza del Zócalo. Y desde aquí vamos a iniciar un recorrido para mostraros todos los rincones de la mayor ciudad de América. Bueno, todos, no sé si nos va a dar tiempo.
We don't really have to go too far to understand Mexico City, since a large part of Mexican society is represented in the Zócalo. This square gathers immigrants from all over the country, salesmen, children, students, jugglers, and shaman.
¿Y esto en qué consistiría exactamente?
Además se unta un poco de humo a la persona.
Ajá.
con copal, con esa resina de árbol.
Resina de árbol.
Sí, se llama copal.
Bueno, y a mí me podrías ayudar también, ¿no?
Todos tenemos la luz interior, al maestro dentro de nosotros. Nomás es cosa que queramos nosotros y que lo despertemos, que ahí está durmiendo, está descansando.
Muchas gracias. Perfumado, purificado y un poco más protegido. Una situación perfecta para seguir conociendo.
The problem is, exploring all Mexico City has to offer would take several lifetimes.
$400.
There's something about this city that's hard to define. We find Aztec ruins on streets teeming with people. Different periods of the country's history permeate each neighborhood. Insurgentes is said to be the longest avenue on the planet, and it's a good indicator of the capital's expansion. In Coyoacán, however, we go back to the time of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, although its buildings testify to an older still colonial heritage. Hernán Cortés himself lived on this square. Other neighborhoods take us back to even earlier historical periods. In Xochimilco, we discover a magical place full of boats painted in cheerful colors that wind their way through the canals.
La mejor manera de conocer el barrio de Xochimilco es a través de una de las muchas trajineras que circulan por sus canales. Esta es la forma habitual en la que se circulaba en la antigua Ciudad de México y hoy es uno de los barrios más activos, floridos y divertidos de todo el Distrito Federal.
Mariachis playing on canoes. Routes through aquatic labyrinths, flowers, colors, music and water. Xochimilco is one of those places, one of those truly mystifying places in which legends and poems have become the most coherent way to tell history.
Amo esta tierra de amores, donde el alma tiene flores y en los labios tiene mieles.
As we wander about aimlessly, I imagine how the first people to inhabit this place would have felt. But that happened a long, long time ago. Teotihuacan is 28 miles from Mexico's federal district. We've been working our way backwards through the history of Mexico's capital. Now we've gone back 3,000 years to look at the very first version of the city. No one knows for sure which civilization built the Avenue of the Dead, or the temples where they worshipped a feathered serpent called Quetzalcoatl. We don't know who built the first pyramids on our trip around the world. 2.5 million tourists visit Teotihuacan each year. But the mystical quality of the site is often broken because everyone here wants to sell you something.
Las dos caras que ves de frente representa el sol y la luna, que es el hombre y la mujer.
¿Para el estrés? Sí. Entonces déjamelo un rato.
También lo tengo rectangular con dos calendarios a lo largo.
Nanahuansi. que es la luna.
Que por eso es oscura y este brilla, ¿verdad?
El día y la noche.
Y tengo un cuadrado de 1 metro por 1 metro.
Para otros 3. Esta es la pirámide del Sol, ¿verdad? Sí. Bueno, pues vamos a animarnos a ver si subimos un poco. ¿De acuerdo?
Órale.
Venga, gracias.
Órale, amigo.
Adiós,
¿No quieres
amigo.
llevarte un recuerdo?
One way to avoid this constant assault of salespeople is by hiking 233 feet to the top of the Pyramid of the Sun. This is the summit of a legendary city. It's the tallest point in the whole site. The Pyramid of the Moon is somewhat smaller, although from the top we have an even better view of Teotihuacan. One final effort, and yes, it was worth it. These will not be the last pyramids on our trip. But for now, we will stay here, thinking about the first people ever to set foot in America. This city that has been reborn 1,000 times in this continent of 1,000 cultures. In this place where time is relative.